I wanted to go over the final instantiation pattern. You'll see this a lot in modern JavaScript. When the initial curriculum for the coding bootcamp was built, this wasn't really super popular, but in fact today it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. You'll see it in React, you'll see it in a lot of the code you look at. So before we jump into the new final syntax for instantiation patterns, I want to go over the last one we reviewed. Remember we had that whole video about the chefs, we had the functional, we had functional shared, we had prototypal, we had pseudo-classical. So to quickly, if you haven't seen that, you need to watch it first before any of this makes sense. But I'm going to do a quick review for those who have watched it, just to make sure it's fresh in your mind. The pseudo-classical, whoops. Hold on, I have to make myself float. There's a way to do that. View, float on top, there we go. So the way pseudo-classical works is you define a function, you assign all your properties of the instance to this, right? So the chef function is going to produce chefs, and you can assign things to every specific instance it produces by assigning them to this. In this case, chef takes an argument when it's instantiated, which is the hat color, and that is assigned to this .hat color. So chef1 will be an object with a property called hat color, and that will equal white in this case. Now what about the methods? What about the functionality, the shared functionality of this class? Well, if you remember the prototype chain, you'll remember that we actually put all the functionality of this class, of every instance of this class that shares, we put all the functionality onto one object. That object is the prototype object on the chef object. So we fill chef.prototype with all our functionality, all our class functionality, our make lasagna method, our make cannoli method. Now these are separate, these aren't associated, but when we use the keyword new, you'll remember that sort of secretly the interpreter implicitly adds these two lines of code. Does those two lines of code implicitly. It sets the this to a new object with a prototype link to the chef.prototype object, and it returns this. In other words, every time we do a property access or method access on an instance of the chef class, it will first check inside the object of chef1. It'll say, is that method or property inside this object? And if not, it will delegate that lookup to chef.prototype. So that's how methods work. You can think about that every instance of a class is all delegating their lookups up to one prototype object, which is chef.prototype. Okay, now let's talk about ES6 classes. ES6 classes, under the hood, do the exact same thing. Every instance of an ES6 class delegates to a prototype object. However, it looks a lot different. So I'm going to write out what this looks like. The first thing is you say class chef. Now I want to pause for a second, and I want to point this out very clearly because this confused me when I started. This is not an object. It's not a function. It is a new thing. It's new syntax. So don't get confused and think it's supposed to look like this. Right? Don't get confused and think you need, key value pairs with commas between the properties. Because it's not an object, it's a class. So all syntactically, this is going to be brand new. So try to clear your assumptions away from the table and just be ready to accept how this looks syntactically. It's not an object, it's not a function, it's a class. Okay, so first of all, this code here, where we assign methods to an instance, where we assign properties to an instance, the way we replicate this in ES6 class is within our class, we make a constructor function. Now within this constructor function, we can do this exact same thing. Close that. And the way this is invoked is exactly the same. Actually, we can even just copy it. It's exactly the same as was before. We use the keyword new. We invoke the chef class. We give it an argument. And this instance of chef will have a property on it called hat color, which is white. So everything you would have done inside the class function on pseudo-classical, you do inside the constructor. Okay? Now here's the final question. Where do the methods go? Where does all the functionality go? Well, it's super simple. You just put all the functionality as functions directly within the chef class. So check this out. This is all you do. Look how simple that is. And that's ES6 classes. Instead of assigning your methods to a prototype object, you just add them directly into the chef curly brackets. Instead of making a function for your property assignment, you just put it inside the constructor function inside the chef class. Now again, don't be confused and think this works differently. It's actually the exact same thing. If I was to console log chef.prototype.makeLasagna, if I was to console log this, the makeLasagna function would appear. Because kind of what's happening under the hood is this. You create a chef and then the interpreter does this. It goes, oh, okay. Basically what, hold on, I misspelled function twice. It's basically what it's doing. It takes any methods you build inside chef and it just adds them to the chef.prototype. Except for the constructor word is reserved, so it knows that's for when it's instantiated. That's about it. Very, very simple. Thanks a lot.